Let her wear them, my brother sneered. It's all she has besides the nightmares and other people's blood. He said it loud enough for everyone to hear. My own family saw my sacrifice as a stain and my honor as a threat. They tried to bury my career and my spirit under the weight of their judgment. What they didn't realize is that you can't bury a woman who was born to fight back. My name is Colonel Cedra Holmes, United States Army. Tonight, I was operating in a foreign country. The language was English and the soil was North Carolinian, but I was an alien behind enemy lines. The grand ballroom of the Carolina Hotel was a spectacle of polished power. From a high, ornate ceiling, massive crystal chandeliers dripped light onto a sea of men in tailored tuxedos and women in shimmering evening gowns. The mellow notes of a jazz band playing "Fly Me to the Moon" wove through the air, which was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and aged whiskey. The scene was reflected in the gleaming oak floor, a surface so flawless it felt like a judgment on anyone with scars. I stood alone by the bar, a solitary island in my dark blue Army service uniform. While champagne flutes fizzed all around me, I held a simple glass of club soda with a slice of lime. My training had taken over the moment I'd arrived, my eyes scanning the room not as a guest, but as a field analyst. The brilliant, practiced smiles were camouflage. The firm, political handshakes were transactions. The whole affair felt sterile, scrubbed clean of the honest grit of sand, sweat, and the unwavering camaraderie I had built my life on. This was a world of pristine surfaces, and I was a creature of the jagged edge, a relic from a place they only read about. My family found me, gliding through the crowd like elegant predators. My mother, Evelyn, and my younger sister, Serafina, were the perfect picture of Southern grace, a quality they often wielded like a weapon. "Cedra, darling, you really should try to smile more," Serafina murmured, her voice as sweet as iced tea. Her eyes, however, performed a cold, swift sweep of the decorations on my uniform. The silver star, the bronze star, the purple heart. To her, they were just gaudy trinkets, a breach of social etiquette. My mother leaned in, her gloved hand placing a delicate but unyielding weight on my forearm. She lowered her voice to a conspiratorial hiss, a poison dart meant only for me. "Cedra, couldn't you have taken those medals off? They just look so boastful." The word boastful was delivered like a conviction, a final verdict on my character. But the killing blow, as it always did, came from my older brother, Kalen. He strode toward us, a portrait of Washington, D.C. influence, swirling a heavy tumbler of Macallan 18. As a senior partner at a private military contractor, he profited from the outcomes of wars he would never have to fight. A cruel smirk touched his lips as he stopped, and he raised his voice just enough to be clearly heard by the circle of decorated generals standing nearby. "Let her wear them, mother," he announced, his tone a disgusting performance of pity. "It's all she has, besides the nightmares and other people's blood." A dead silence fell. It was an absolute void, a vacuum that sucked all the sound and air from our corner of the room. It was heavier than body armor. I watched a two-star general suddenly clear his throat and turn away, his attention abruptly captured by the floral arrangement. Another became intensely engaged in conversation with his wife. The ripple of their discomfort was a public confirmation of my shame. The humiliation was a physical force, hotter and sharper than the shrapnel I'd once dug out of my own shoulder in a dusty firebase. That was the clean, impersonal pain of a battlefield. This was a poisoned dagger, twisted in an old wound by the hand of the very boy I used to defend from bullies in the schoolyard. I stood there, my face an impassive mask I'd perfected over 25 years of service. But beneath the surface, I was hemorrhaging. I didn't look at him. I didn't look at any of them. To engage would be to surrender. Instead, my gaze broke free from the wreckage and scanned the room, this time not as an analyst, but as a survivor searching for solid ground. And then I saw him. In a forgotten corner, almost completely hidden by a large potted fern, sat Lieutenant Reese Valerius. To this glittering crowd, he was invisible, a piece of inconvenient furniture. But I didn't just notice him, I saw him. I recognized the look in his eyes instantly. It was the thousand-yard stare. The hollowed-out gaze of a soldier who has physically returned but whose soul is still pinned down by enemy fire on some distant, God-forsaken hill. He was here, but he was also very far away. My next action wasn't an impulse, it was a mission. My training is to run toward the sound of the guns. Reese was a battlefield of one, and he was taking heavy casualties. I placed my glass on the bar with a quiet click. I squared my shoulders, and I began to walk. The crowd of silk and wool parted before me as I crossed the polished floor, each step deliberate. I stopped before his chair. Then, I did something that brought the ballroom to a complete standstill. I lowered myself down, bending one knee to the floor. In my world, this is not an act of submission. It is the highest sign of respect one warrior can offer another. I looked up at the young lieutenant. His eyes slowly refocused from that distant horizon to my face. "Lieutenant," I said, my voice steady and clear, a calm command in the silent room. "Would you do me the honor of this dance?" He stared, his mouth slightly open. Confusion warred with disbelief in his eyes until a flicker of something else, understanding, finally won. He gave a single, jerky nod. As he pushed himself up to stand, the sharp, metallic scrape of his heavy leg brace against the oak floor was the only sound in the vast hall. It was a harsh, discordant note, but to me, it was the most honest music I had heard all night. It was a soundtrack of pain, effort, and unbreakable resilience. We didn't speak as we moved to the center of the floor, his gait stiff and measured, my presence a quiet, steadying support. We were two soldiers on patrol, in a world that could never understand our war. We had only taken a few steps when a figure approached. It was his father, General Tiberius Valerius, a living legend. The man they called the God of War of CENTCOM. His face was a chiseled map of strategic command and hard decisions. But as he looked at his son, standing tall and moving under his own power, that legendary composure shattered. His eyes, accustomed to staring down global threats, glistened with unshed tears. He stopped directly in front of me, his gaze powerful and direct. His voice, a command that had moved armies, was now a quiet testament, thick with an emotion that silenced the entire room. "Colonel," he said, and every soul in the ballroom leaned in. "You just gave me my son back." It wasn't a thank you, it was a knighting. It was a public declaration of what true strength and real value looked like, made in front of those who only understood the superficial kind. It was an honor that outshone every medal on my uniform. I glanced over at my brother. For the first time in his life, Kalen was speechless. He stood frozen, the expensive Macallan in his hand suddenly looking absurd and meaningless. He had tried to bury me with words, but he was powerless now. The raw, undeniable power of a father's gratitude, earned through a simple act of human decency, was a currency his fortune could never buy. The ride home in the Lincoln Navigator was drowned in a silence heavier than incoming artillery. It was a tactical silence, thick with unspoken accusations and years of resentment. In the back seat, my mother and Serafina sat perfectly still, two marble statues of silent complicity. They stared out their respective windows, making themselves small, refusing to exist in the conflict my brother was about to initiate. Up front, Kalen gripped the leather-wrapped steering wheel, his knuckles white under the intermittent glow of the streetlights. His eyes were cold, fixed on the dark road ahead. He didn't start with a yell. That wasn't his style. Kalen's cruelty was corporate, analytical. He began my trial by jury with the calm, measured tone of a DC consultant delivering a hostile performance review. "That was a well-staged performance, Cedra. Very impressive," he said, his voice slicing through the quiet. "A perfectly calculated engagement, turning a four-star general's son into a strategic asset to polish your own, slightly tarnished image." He paused, letting the words land like precision strikes. "He wasn't a person to you in that moment. He was leverage, a tool." Each word was a scalpel, expertly dissecting my act of human connection and laying it out as a grotesque, self-serving conspiracy. He knew my deepest fear was not being seen as a hero, but being seen as a fraud. He was targeting the very core of my identity, the part of me that lived and breathed for others, and painting it as a manipulative lie. I stared straight ahead, focusing on the rhythmic sweep of the windshield wipers against the light drizzle. I said nothing. Silence was my only armor. He took my silence as an invitation to press his attack. My world, Cedra, the one that pays for this house and your comfortable life when you're not playing soldier, operates on compliance and results, not on sentimental, impulsive gestures. You've always thought you were the exception to the rules. That's what makes you so dangerous. The word hit me like a physical blow. Compliance. It wasn't his word. It was my ghost. And with it, the hermetically sealed cabin of the Lincoln Navigator dissolved around me. The smell of leather and air freshener was replaced by the acrid stench of cordite and hot red dust. I was no longer on a paved road in North Carolina. I was back in the Sahel. The sun was a merciless hammer. The air was a thick blanket of dust and flies. I was kneeling, my hands deep inside the shredded torso of a boy, no older than 10. His name was... I never learned his name. He was the son of a crucial local informant, and he'd been caught in the shrapnel of an IED meant for us. Dark, precious blood was soaking through my gloves, slick and warm against my skin. It was a river I couldn't stop. I was packing the wound, my mind a frantic race against the clock, trying every technique I knew. Then, the voice came through my earpiece, tinny and devoid of all emotion. A voice from another world, a clean world of maps and strategies. All units, this is command. We are Oscar Mike, mission is priority. I repeat, all units are to withdraw immediately. Withdraw! The word was an obscenity. My hands were literally holding this child's life together. I looked down, past my own blood-soaked fingers, and into the boy's wide, terrified eyes. They weren't the eyes of an asset. They were the eyes of a son, a child who wanted his mother. They were a silent, desperate plea. My hands, the hands of a surgeon, refused to let go. My oath, my very soul, screamed at me to stay. But I was a soldier, and a soldier's first duty is to the mission. A soldier's foundation is compliance. So I complied. I pulled my hands away. I left him there in the dust. I followed the order. That failure wasn't a tactical error. It was a wound on my soul. A moral injury. The ghost of that boy, with his wide, pleading eyes, was the one I could never save. It was my greatest failure, not as a soldier, but as a healer. The sound of Kaylin's voice pulled me from the searing sun of the Sahel back into the cold, sterile dark of the Navigator. He had no idea he was dancing on my grave. The casual cruelty of his ignorance was, in itself, a special kind of torture. You see, you think with your heart, he continued, his tone dripping with disdain. It's a liability. It makes you unpredictable. You don't see the bigger picture. I finally turned my head and looked at him. My voice was quiet, a near whisper, but it carried the weight of every life I had ever held in my hands. I was there, and I saw him, when no one else did. My calmness, my refusal to break, seemed to enrage him more than any argument could have. He gripped the wheel tighter, his jaw clenched. The mask of the cool consultant slipped, revealing the furious, insecure man beneath. You'll learn soon enough that being a hero comes with a price, he spat, the threat now naked and ugly. There are people in the Pentagon, Cedra, people who sign the checks, and they don't like loose cannons. They don't like messy stories. The car slowed, pulling into the familiar driveway of our childhood home. The trial was over, the verdict was in. He had found me guilty. The Navigator came to a stop. I didn't wait for him to turn off the engine. I opened my door and stepped out into the cool, damp night air. I didn't look back. I didn't say goodbye. There was nothing left to say to the ghosts in that car. As the red taillights disappeared down the street, I stood there on the wet pavement, the silence of the night wrapping around me. Kaylin thought he had put me in my place. He thought he had reminded me of the rules, of the importance of compliance, but all he had done was remind me of the cost of it. He had thrown a ghost from my past in my face, trying to create a new one. But he had failed. Have you ever had a moment like that? A moment where someone's words, meant to tear you down, accidentally handed you the very reason you needed to fight back? Standing there, I made a silent vow. I would not be silenced. I would not comply with their narrative. He had started a war of whispers and shadows, and he was about to find out that in the shadows, I was home. Kalen's war didn't begin with a declaration. It began with whispers. His attack wasn't a frontal assault. It was a campaign of psychological warfare, fought with invisible arrows tipped in poison. The first arrow found its mark 2 days after the gala. I was in my office at Womack Army Medical Center, reviewing patient charts, when my phone buzzed with a text. It was from my commanding officer, Colonel Marcus Thorne, a good man I'd served with for years. The message was brief and chilling. Cedra, there's noise coming out of DC. Someone's pulling your after-action report from the Sahel mission. Noise. In the political ecosystem of the military, noise is the soft, rustling sound of a career being assassinated. It's the prelude to an investigation, a career setback, a quiet reassignment to a desk in the middle of nowhere. I knew instantly who was behind it. Kalen. My own brother was targeting my service record. A cold wave of helplessness washed over me. I had faced down gunfire and IEDs. I knew how to fight an enemy I could see. But how do you fight a ghost? How do you shoot down a lie? This was a different kind of battlefield, one where the truth wasn't your strongest weapon, but your most vulnerable asset. The second arrow arrived a few days later. A young resident, a bright-eyed captain I'd been mentoring, approached my desk. He couldn't quite meet my eyes. "Ma'am," he stammered, holding out his phone. I thought you should see this." I took the phone. He had an article pulled up from a well-known defense blog, The Beltway Insider. The headline was a masterpiece of character assassination, designed to plant a seed of doubt that could never be fully uprooted. Special Forces, heroin, or tactical liability. Sources raise concerns. Over Cole Holmes's judgment. My breath caught in my throat. The article, quoting multiple unnamed senior Pentagon sources, painted a picture of an emotionally unstable officer, a loose cannon whose impulsive actions endangered her unit. It twisted the details of the Sahel mission into an unrecognizable fiction, transforming my desperate attempt to save a child into an act of reckless insubordination that nearly compromised a critical operation. Reading those words felt like poison seeping into my bloodstream. Kalen didn't need proof, he just needed to create suspicion. In his world, a well-placed doubt was more powerful than a mountain of evidence. The lie was now in print. It was real. But the worst part, the most agonizing part of his campaign, was the silence. The friendly pats on the back in the hallways stopped. The casual invitations to grab coffee to discuss a difficult case dried up. My colleagues, men and women I had shared holidays and hardships with, now averted their eyes when I passed. Their conversations would drop to a murmur. I wasn't being court-martialed, but I was being exiled. I wasn't confined by barbed wire, but by the impenetrable walls of suspicion. The isolation was most acute in the mess hall. I'd take my tray of food and sit at an empty table, acutely aware of the sideways glances from the younger soldiers. I could see them whispering, looking down at their phones, no doubt reading the article that was making the rounds. I understood. They weren't malicious. They were just soldiers, trained to be wary of any perceived weakness in the chain of command. They were casualties of Kalen's information war, the pain of being isolated among the very people I had sworn to protect. The people I considered my real family was a unique form of torment. No training manual, no amount of field experience could prepare you for that. I remember sitting there one afternoon, pushing green beans around my plate, when a line from a Bible verse I hadn't thought of in years floated into my mind. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. I'm not a religious woman, but the words didn't feel like a religious comfort. They felt like a confirmation, a validation of the lonely, brutal path you walk when you choose to do the right thing in a world that often rewards the wrong one. It was in the depths of that isolation that the counteroffensive began. Not with a bang, but with the quiet arrival of an envelope. It wasn't a standard inter-office memo. It was a heavy cream-colored envelope delivered by special courier to my office. The return address was from the headquarters of the United States Special Operations Command, SOCOM. My heart hammered against my ribs as I slid it open with a letter opener. It wasn't a summons. It wasn't a reprimand. It was a letter. Typed on the personal letterhead of General Tiberius Valerius. But the message itself was handwritten in strong, confident ink. Colonel Holmes, it began. My young soldiers at the Womack Rehabilitation Center need to hear your story. Not the story circulating in the press, but the one I saw with my own two eyes. The one about what it truly means to leave no one behind. The honor of your presence is requested at your earliest convenience. Your voice is needed. Sincerely, T. Valerius. I read the letter 3 times, my hands trembling slightly. This wasn't just an invitation. It was a lifeline. It was a weapon. In the middle of Kalen's storm of whispers and lies, the most powerful man in my world had just handed me a shield. He was offering me a platform, a chance to fight back not by denying the lie, but by speaking my own truth. It was a testament, a piece of concrete evidence that even in the deepest darkness, there are those who still see the light. I held the heavy paper in my hand, the embossed seal of the command cool against my fingertips. My brother had tried to make me a pariah. He had tried to isolate me and define me by his version of events. But this letter, this single piece of paper, was a direct order from Olympus. It was a command to fight. And a good soldier always obeys a command. I accepted General Valerius's invitation the next morning. But I knew I couldn't walk into Womack armed with nothing but good intentions. Kalen had declared a new kind of war, and I needed a new kind of arsenal. My small, tidy office transformed into a tactical operations center. The enemy wasn't a rogue state or a terrorist cell. It was a private military contractor with deep pockets and deeper connections. So I didn't need guns. I needed information. The whiteboards, usually covered in surgical protocols and staffing schedules, were wiped clean. I began to draw a new battle map. At the center, I wrote my brother's name, Kalen Holmes. From his name, a line connected to his company, Ethelred Solutions. Using my own PII, personally identifiable information, to navigate the labyrinth of public records, I started pulling government contracts, lobbying reports, and political contribution filings. Lines spiderwebbed out from Ethelred, connecting them to specific lawmakers on the House Armed Services Committee. The battlefield was familiar, but the weapons were different. The enemy wore Armani suits instead of combat gear, and their weapons of choice were contract clauses and backroom deals. But public records could only tell me so much. I needed intelligence from the ground. I reactivated a network I hadn't used in years, my old one. The quiet professionals, the former operators who had traded their gear for keyboards and now worked in the shadows of cybersecurity and private intelligence. My first call was to a man I only knew as Ghost. He was a legendary Green Beret comm sergeant who was now a formidable gray hat hacker, the kind of person who could walk through digital walls without leaving a footprint. The call was made on an encrypted app, a conversation that would exist for only a few minutes before vanishing into the ether. Cedra, his voice crackled, low and gravelly. Been a long time. I heard about the noise. Your brother was always a snake. Thinks war is just an Excel spreadsheet. I need to know what he's planning, Ghost, I said, cutting to the chase. What's Ethelred's angle? Give me a few hours, he replied. There was no hesitation. In our world, you don't ask why, you just execute. Through Ghost and a few other discreet calls, a disturbing picture began to emerge. Ethelred Solutions was aggressively lobbying Congress to privatize entire sections of battlefield medical care. Their pitch was built on cold corporate logic. Military-run units were not cost-effective and were difficult to control from a policy standpoint. They argued that private contractors could do the job cheaper and with more flexibility. Suddenly, it all made sense. I wasn't just a personal target born of sibling rivalry. I was a symbol. I was Colonel Cedra Holmes, a decorated Special Forces combat surgeon. My story, my reputation for putting soldiers' lives above all else, was a direct threat to their narrative. To sell their product, they needed to discredit mine. To make their case, they had to destroy me. This was no longer a family feud. It was a corporate strategy, and I was standing in the way of millions of dollars in government contracts. The sense of betrayal I felt was no longer just personal, it was systemic. The weight of it all was heavy. One afternoon, on my way to the Cumberland County Public Library to do more research, I was lost in thought, dissecting contract language in my head. As I walked past the entrance, my eyes fell on a man sitting on a low brick wall. He was homeless, his clothes were worn, and he had the haunted, weary look of someone who had been left behind by the world. But as I passed, his gaze lifted and fixated on something. Not on my face, but on my coat lapel. Pinned there was a small, unassuming arrowhead pin, the branch insignia of the U.S. Army Special Forces. His posture changed. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible shift. His back straightened, a ghost of military bearing returning to his slumped shoulders. He looked me square in the eye, and in a low, rough voice, he spoke 2 words. De oppresso liber. To liberate the oppressed. Our motto. The guiding principle of my entire career. Hearing it from him in that moment was like a lightning strike to my soul. It wasn't a greeting, it was a reminder, a mission statement. I realized in that instant that I was the one who was now oppressed. And if I couldn't liberate myself, how could I ever hope to help anyone else? I stopped. I turned back and bought the man a hot cup of chili from a nearby deli and a coffee. We sat on the wall together, and for 20 minutes, I just listened to his story. That simple act of connection, of recognizing a fellow soldier, recalibrated my moral compass. It solidified my resolve. I wasn't just fighting for my reputation anymore. I was fighting for the very principle those words represented. The turning point, the weapon I had been searching for, arrived that night. It came not from a government database or a hacker, but from an encrypted email. The subject line contained a single word: truth. My heart pounded as I opened it. The sender was an address I didn't recognize, but I knew the name at the bottom of the message instantly. Isolde, Kaylin's ex-wife. The email was short, but it was devastating. Cedra, I've been silent for too long. I saw the news clip of you at the gala, the one of you dancing with that young soldier. I saw what you did. And I saw the look on Kaylin's face afterward. He's trying to extinguish your light, just like he tried to extinguish mine. He thinks he's erased everything, but he got careless. I think this belongs to you. Attached was a compressed file, a digital treasure trove of evidence, internal Ethelred emails, memos outlining their lobbying strategy, and the final, damning piece of the puzzle, a screenshot of a text message Kaylin had sent to his business partner the morning after the gala. My eyes locked on the words, stark white against a blue background. The Valerius incident is a problem. The SOF medic hero narrative is gaining traction. Discrediting her is now top priority. We need to kill this story before it kills our proposal. I stared at the screen, a cold, hard certainty settling in my gut. This wasn't a rumor anymore. It wasn't an anonymous source. This was Kaylin, in his own words, laying out his motive and his plan. This was the smoking gun. This was my ammunition. The evidence I had collected was a loaded weapon, cold and heavy in my possession. But before I could use it, I had a promise to keep. I drove to Womack, not to the main hospital building, but to the sprawling rehabilitation center on the west side of the base. As I stepped out of my car, the sterile opulence of the Carolina Hotel felt like a distant, irrelevant dream. This place was different. There was no jazz band here. The air hummed with a different kind of music. The rhythmic clang of weights in the physical therapy room, the soft whir of wheelchair motors, the sharp scrape of metal leg braces on linoleum floors, and the occasional guttural cry of effort and pain. The air smelled not of perfume, but of antiseptic cleaner and the honest sweat of hard work. This was not a place of polished surfaces. This was a place of grit, of stripped-down humanity, of profound dignity. This was my cathedral. I found Rhys Valerius in the PT room, his hands gripping the parallel bars. His face was beaded with sweat, his jaw set in a grim line of determination as he forced his uncooperative leg to move, step by agonizing step. But his eyes were different. The hollow, thousand-yard stare was gone. In its place, a small, hard flame had been lit. He saw me watching and paused, catching his breath. He didn't smile or offer a word of thanks. He simply gave me a short, sharp nod, a silent acknowledgement from one soldier to another. That single gesture, coming from him in this place, was worth more than any medal the Pentagon could ever pin on my chest. It was a confirmation. I was in the right place. Later, I was in the common room, a large sunlit space with worn armchairs and a perpetually half-finished jigsaw puzzle on a card table. It was there I saw a young officer, Lieutenant Kira Sterling. She was a pilot whose career had been cut short by an RPG. She was sitting on a low bench, her body tense with frustration, trying to tie the laces of her running shoe with one hand. Her other arm ended in a sleek carbon fiber prosthesis just below the elbow. Her face was a mask of fury and shame, and the other soldiers in the room, out of a sense of respect and awkwardness, were pretending not to notice her struggle. My first instinct as a doctor, a fixer, was to walk over and help her. But I stopped myself. My brother had accused me of using people as tools. I would not prove him right. Instead of offering to do it for her, I walked over and quietly sat in the armchair opposite her. I didn't look at her hands. I met her angry, frustrated gaze. "The first time I had to clamp an aorta under fire," I said, my voice low and calm. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the forceps. I was 28 years old. I was terrified I was going to fail, that this man was going to die right there because my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Kira's head snapped up, her frustration momentarily forgotten, replaced by surprise. I continued, my gaze steady. He didn't die. But I never forgot that feeling of utter failure, of my own body betraying me. Sometimes the hardest part isn't getting the job done. It's giving yourself permission to be clumsy, permission to fail, and permission to try again. I didn't offer a solution. I didn't give her a special technique for one-handed knots. I just shared my own moment of weakness, my own fear. I offered her my vulnerability as a shield for her own. I sat with her in silence for another minute, and then I got up and walked to the coffee machine. When I glanced back, she was standing up, both of her shoes now perfectly tied. A small, triumphant smile played on her lips. Later that afternoon, I met with the group of soldiers General Valerius had assembled. There was no stage, no podium. I pulled a simple chair into their circle, making myself one of them. We were just a group of people in a room, surrounded by the quiet dignity of their shared struggle. I didn't talk about bravery. I didn't give a speech about sacrifice or the flag. I told them a simple story. "I was on a long-range patrol once," I began, "and we were caught in a sandstorm, a real monster. Visibility was zero. One of my men, a young sergeant, had twisted his ankle badly. He could walk, but he was slow, and he was in pain. The mission priority was to get to our extraction point before we were compromised. I looked around the circle, meeting each of their eyes. I could have had 2 other soldiers carry him to speed us up. I could have given him a shot of morphine and told him to push through the pain. But instead, I just fell in step next to him. I put my arm across his back, not to pull him, but just to be a steady presence. I used my body to shield his face from the worst of the wind. And we walked together, one slow, deliberate step at a time. We were the last ones to the chopper, but we got there together. I let the silence settle in the room. My role out there, and my role here, isn't to pull you out of the darkness. It's not to fix you, or to tell you how to heal. My role is to be willing to sit with you in the dark for as long as it takes, until you are ready to find the light for yourself. It's to walk alongside you, not ahead of you." The room was quiet, but it was a heavy, thoughtful silence. It was the silence of recognition, of a truth deeply felt. As I was leaving the center, Lieutenant Sterling stopped me at the door. She looked at me, her gaze clear and strong. "You don't lead from the front, Colonel," she said. "You lead from the side. But that's what makes us all want to move forward." Driving away from the base, the hard drive with Kaylin's emails felt less important. It was still my weapon, my evidence. But I realized in that moment that my greatest strength wasn't the proof of his lies. It was the truth these soldiers had just reflected back at me. It was the quiet power of walking alongside someone, not as a savior, but as a fellow traveler. Have you ever felt that? The profound strength that comes not from fixing someone, but just from being present with them in their struggle? I was no longer fighting for my own honor. I was fighting for them. I was fighting for the sacred space of the quiet, patient work of healing, a space my brother and his spreadsheets could never understand and would never be allowed to touch. That night, my small, quiet kitchen became a war room. The lights were off, save for the cold, blue-white glow of my laptop screen, casting long shadows on the walls. I sat at my simple wooden table, the same one where I drank my morning coffee, and I began to build my weapon. I wasn't writing an after-action report. I was writing an indictment. The document I compiled was not the work of a healer, but of a cold, methodical prosecutor. Every piece of evidence Isolde had sent me was a bullet, and I was carefully loading them into a legal magazine. Kaylin's emails, the internal Ethelred Solutions memos, the lobbying reports I'd pulled myself. Each one was meticulously organized, cross-referenced, and annotated. I created a timeline, linking his slanderous campaign against me directly to his company's legislative push in Washington. I cited the specific federal acquisition regulations they had violated, the ethical codes they had trampled. Each word was chosen with surgical precision. There was no emotion, no personal grievance. There was only the undeniable, unshakable truth, assembled into a legal weapon so dense it was unbreakable. I was transforming my pain into a formal complaint to the Department of Defense Inspector General. The document was nearly complete. All the files were collated, encrypted, and ready to be attached. But before I launched the missile, I had one final security check to perform. I made one last call to Ghost on the encrypted app. "It's ready," I said, my voice low. "I'm standing by," he replied. "The source of the attachments, Ghost, is Isolde. She needs to be a ghost. No trace can lead back to her. I can't have her life ruined because she chose to do the right thing." There was a pause on the other end, and then Ghost's gravelly voice came back, filled with a respect that warmed me more than he could know. "Sidra, once that email is sent, I'll scrub the metadata and wipe the path it took from every server between here and the sun. As far as the DoD is concerned, this file will have arrived like a message from God. She's safe. You have my word." I ended the call. His reassurance was a small comfort, but a vital one. It was a reminder that even in this solitary fight, I was not entirely alone. It reaffirmed a core principle. You protect your assets, and you never, ever burn your sources. Isolde had trusted me. I would not fail her. I returned to the report. There was one final, crucial piece to add. At the very top of the first page, I typed a single, powerful sentence. It was my shield and my sword. Subject: Formal complaint filed under the protections of the Military Whistleblower Protection Act, 10 U.S.C., Pers. 1034. That line was more than just legal procedure. It was a declaration of intent. It framed my entire action. I was not a disgruntled sister or a rogue officer. I was a citizen, a soldier, acting within the legal framework of the very system I served, fulfilling my duty to expose corruption and misconduct. I was using the rules Kaylin thought he could manipulate to protect myself and prosecute him. It was an intelligent, strategic move that transformed me from a lone individual into a legally protected whistleblower. I was no longer just Cedra Holmes. I was now a protected party under United States Code. The report was done, the attachments were loaded, the email was addressed to the anonymous secure server of the Inspector General's office. All that was left to do was click a single button. My hand rested on the mouse, my index finger hovering over the send icon on the screen. For a long, breathless moment, I hesitated. This was the point of no return. A single click of this button would set in motion a chain of events I could not control. My career, my reputation, my future, everything I had worked for over 25 years, was balanced on this tiny digital precipice. The weight of that decision was immense. It was the moment before you step out of the helicopter, the deep breath before you breach the door. I closed my eyes. The faces of the soldiers at Womack appeared in my mind. I saw Reese, his jaw set in determination as he took a painful step. I saw Kira, her small triumphant smile after tying her own shoes. I saw the quiet dignity in their eyes, the unspoken trust they had placed in me. I was fighting for them now, for the sacred space of healing that my brother and his soulless corporation wanted to turn into a line item on a budget. My eyes opened. The hesitation was gone. The fear was gone. All that remained was a cold, clear sense of purpose. My finger clicked the mouse, the button depressed, the email vanished from my outbox. Sent. A wave of profound relief washed over me, a feeling of immense weight being lifted from my shoulders. It was done. I had stepped out of the helicopter. I had breached the door. Whatever happened next, whatever the consequences, I had refused to be a silent victim. I had refused to comply with the lies. I'd broken the silence. I pushed my chair back from the table and stood up, walking over to the kitchen window. I looked out at the quiet, sleeping neighborhood, the same one I'd grown up in. But the world felt different now. A storm was coming. Kalen had summoned it with his whispers and his arrogance, but this time I would not be standing in it alone. I had chosen my side, and my side was the truth. The conference room in the Pentagon was as cold and sterile as an operating theater. The air was thick with the silent, suffocating pressure of high-stakes politics. I was seated not at the long, polished mahogany table with the review board, but in a single chair set against the wall, like a defendant not even granted the dignity of a table. An observer. A ghost. From his seat at the main table, my brother, Kalen, was the picture of confidence. He exuded an aura of power, leaning back in his leather chair, exchanging subtle, knowing nods with a few of the generals on the committee, men whose political campaigns his company had generously funded. He believed this was his stage. He believed this was the final act of my public execution. He was radiating victory. He had no idea he had just walked into a perfectly laid ambush. The chairman of the committee, a weathered three-star general on the verge of retirement, cleared his throat. He began in a dry, bureaucratic monotone. This special review has been convened to address certain concerns that have been raised regarding the after-action report filed by Colonel Cedra Holmes for her unit's operations in the Sahel region, designation 7B. Kalen allowed himself a small, predatory smile. This was it, the public condemnation, the official end of his troublesome sister. To clarify these concerns, the chairman continued, looking down at his notes. The committee has invited a witness who was present on the ground during the incident in question. The door at the far end of the room opened. A woman in a full-dress uniform stepped inside, her boots making a sharp, decisive sound on the tiled floor. The room fell silent. Kalen froze, the color draining from his face. His smile vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated shock. It was Master Sergeant Evaden Thorne, a living legend in the Special Forces community, a woman so tough and so respected they called her Valkyrie. She was an operator whose reputation was so unimpeachable that even Kalen, in all his arrogance, wouldn't dare to challenge her word. This wasn't part of his plan. Evaden walked to the table, her back ramrod straight, and stood at attention. She did not look at Kalen. She did not look at me. She addressed only the chairman. Master Sergeant Thorne, the chairman said, please recount the events of that day. Evaden's testimony was a lesson in military precision. It was clear, concise, and utterly devoid of emotion. She recounted how, under sustained mortar fire, I had calmly stabilized 3 critical casualties simultaneously. She described how, after securing my own men, I had broken cover against protocol to render aid to the wounded local boy. Colonel Holmes then remained with the non-combatant casualty until she received a direct, repeated order from command to withdraw. Evaden stated, her voice as hard and clear as granite. She paused, then delivered the final, devastating sentence. The colonel complied with the order, sir, but she refused to comply with indifference. The words hung in the sterile air, a stark indictment of the very notion that my actions were anything but honorable. Before Kalen could even begin to process this, another voice cut through the silence. Mr. Chairman, if I may. All eyes turned to General Tiberius Valerius, who had been sitting silently at the end of the table. He slowly rose to his feet, and in that moment, he was not just a four-star general. He was a father. The concerns raised about Colonel Holmes's report prompted me to do my own review, he said, his voice a low, powerful rumble that commanded absolute attention. And my review led me to witness Colonel Holmes perform an act of battlefield medicine I have never seen before. She managed to bring a soldier all the way home, not in a C-17, not in a flag-draped coffin, but right here, on American soil, in a ballroom in North Carolina. She saved my son, not from an enemy bullet, but from the darkness that follows. His gaze swept across the room and landed, like a physical weight, on my brother. Integrity is the bedrock of this uniform, the general declared, his voice rising with cold fury. It is the foundation upon which everything we do is built. When we allow that bedrock to be chipped away by whispers, by political maneuvering, by men who see war as a business opportunity, we have already lost the battle before the first shot is even fired. The air crackled with tension. Kalen looked trapped, his face a ghastly shade of white. The chairman nodded slowly at General Valerius, then turned his attention back to his papers. "Thank you, General," he said grimly. "Your perspective is noted. It also appears your concerns are shared by others." He looked up, his eyes scanning the room. As of 0800 this morning, my office was made aware that the Department of Defense Inspector General has received a formal, detailed report under the Military Whistleblower Protection Act. This report alleges a coordinated campaign of misinformation and potential contract fraud on the part of a civilian contractor, Ethelred Solutions. Kalen flinched as if he'd been struck. "The IG's office has opened a full criminal investigation," the chairman stated, his voice flat and final. He then gave a curt nod to an aide standing by a large presentation screen. And the whistleblower was kind enough to provide supporting documentation. The screen flickered to life, and there it was. An image of Kalen's text message, blown up for the entire room to see. The words were massive, stark, and undeniable. "The Valerius incident is a problem. The S-off medic hero narrative is gaining traction. Discrediting her is now top priority." A collective gasp went through the room. Kalen's face, which had been white, now turned a mottled, sickly gray. He half rose from his chair, his mouth opening and closing like a fish, sputtering meaningless protests. This is out of context. It's a fabrication." But no one was listening. No one was looking at him. They were all looking at the screen, at the raw, ugly truth of his betrayal laid bare for the world to see. I didn't look at him either. I didn't need to see his collapse. I just looked straight ahead, my back straight, my chin held high. I didn't have to say a single word. The truth was finally speaking for me. The aftershocks of the Pentagon meeting spread through the military community like wildfire. The story became a cautionary tale whispered in hallways and over secure phone lines. Ethelred Solutions had its contracts frozen pending the outcome of the Inspector General's investigation. Kalen was suspended, his career and reputation in ruins. I had won. Decisively. But there was no triumphant parade. There was no victory party. I returned to my small, quiet apartment off base, and as I closed the door behind me, the adrenaline of the fight drained away, leaving behind a profound and hollow emptiness. It was the silence after the storm, the eerie quiet of a battlefield after the shooting stops. I had won the war, but the cost was the final, irrevocable shattering of a bond with the brother I once knew. I didn't turn on the lights. I walked through the dim rooms to the living room window and just stood there, watching the evening traffic pass by. Victory wasn't loud. It didn't taste sweet. It tasted of loss and the bone-deep weariness of a long, painful war. That evening, as I was sitting in the quiet dark, there was a soft knock at my door. It was a young corporal from the motor pool holding a simple cardboard box. "For you, Colonel," he said, handing it to me. Inside, nestled in a linen napkin, was a dozen still warm oatmeal raisin cookies. Tucked into the side was a small handwritten note on elegant stationery. Thank you for giving me my son's smile back. And my husband's too. Eleanor Valerius. This simple, homespun gift from the general's wife, this acknowledgement from one woman to another, meant more to me than any official commendation ever could. It was a reminder of what I had been fighting for. 2 days later, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. It's Kalen. Can we meet? He asked to meet at a shabby little diner in Fayetteville, the kind with cracked vinyl booths and a jukebox that hadn't been updated since the 90s. It was a place we used to go as kids to spend our allowance on milkshakes and French fries. When I saw him sitting in a booth in the back corner, I barely recognized him. He looked like he had aged a decade in a week. The arrogant, condescending titan of industry was gone. In his place was a shrunken, pathetic man. He couldn't meet my eyes. He just stared into his black coffee as if it held the answers to the universe. I was wrong, he finally said, his voice a hoarse, broken whisper. It was the first time in his adult life I had ever heard him admit fault. He finally looked up at me, and what I saw in his eyes wasn't anger. It was fear. I don't hate you, Cedra. I'm scared of you. I've always been scared of you. Your light, your certainty. It just made my own world feel so small, so cheap. For the first time, he was telling the truth. And I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no triumph. Just a deep, profound sadness for this small, insecure man who had spent his entire life choosing to destroy rather than to build, simply because he was afraid of being overshadowed. I listened as he rambled on about pressure, about expectations, about the world he lived in. I didn't interrupt. I just let him empty himself of all his poison and his justifications. When he finally fell silent, exhausted, I took a slow sip of my water. I don't hate you anymore, Kalen, I said, and my voice was calm, steady, and devoid of the anger that had fueled me for so long. But I'm no longer waiting for you to change. I'm done. I looked at him directly, and I delivered the final, liberating sentence. I forgive you. Not for you. For me. I need peace. That was the moment of my true release. I stood up from the booth, leaving my water untouched. I placed a $10 bill on the table to cover our coffees. And I walked away, leaving him alone with his newfound and utterly useless truth. That night, I went into my closet and pulled out a small cedar-lined wooden box from the top shelf. It was filled with the artifacts of a shared childhood. Faded photographs of 2 kids with gap-toothed grins at the beach, letters written in a child's messy scrawl from summer camp, a silly medal he had made for me out of a bottle cap and a ribbon. For years, this box had been a source of quiet pain, a reminder of what was lost. I sat with it for a long time, not with anger, but with a gentle, tender sadness. I wrote one last letter, a letter I would never send. It wasn't an accusation, it was a farewell. A letter forgiving the boy in the pictures and saying goodbye to the man he became. I folded it carefully and placed it back in the box on top of all the other memories. Then, I carried the box out to the small barren patch of my backyard. I placed it inside an old metal trash can I used for yard waste. I struck a single match. I watched as the small flame caught the edge of a photograph, the image of us on a tire swing curling and turning black before disappearing into the fire. The orange light licked at the old letters, consuming the words, turning the memories to ash. I didn't cry. I felt a strange and wonderful lightness spread through my chest, as if a heavy armor I didn't even know I was wearing had just been unstrapped and allowed to fall away. The fire wasn't just burning old paper and photographs, it was burning a lifetime of burdens. The burden of seeking approval from someone who could never give it. The burden of trying to prove my worth. The burden of a ghost I had carried for far too long. When the last flame died down, there was nothing left but a pile of gray ash and a vast, silent, star-filled sky above me. I took a deep, clean breath. The air tasted of freedom. I had finally cut the last cord. I had written my own ending. The awards ceremony was held in the main auditorium at Womack. The space was formal and solemn, filled with rows of soldiers in their dress uniforms, their faces a testament to service and sacrifice. There was no champagne here, no string quartet. There was only a profound shared respect that felt more sacred than any cathedral I had ever entered. I stood on the stage, my back straight, as General Valerius spoke from the podium. "We are here today to present a new, special commendation," he began, his voice echoing through the silent hall. "The Aegis Cross. In mythology, the Aegis was the shield of the gods, a symbol not of aggression, but of divine protection. This award is not for acts of valor in taking a hill, but for a different, deeper kind of courage. It is for the courage to walk into another's darkness and stand with them, to shield them not from bullets, but from despair." His eyes found mine. Colonel Cedra Holmes has shown this courage. She reminds us that the highest calling of a leader is not to command, but to serve, not to fix, but to heal, not to lead from the front, but to walk alongside. He stepped forward, holding the medal. It was a simple, elegant silver cross, with a representation of a shield at its center. As he pinned it to my uniform, the weight of it felt immense. But I wasn't thinking of myself. My mind was a world away. I thought of Sergeant Jacques Cordova, whose life I had saved in Kandahar. I thought of Specialist Anya Petrova, who I had talked off a ledge one dark night in Germany. I thought of the nameless boy in the Sahel, whose ghost I still carried. This medal didn't belong to me. It belonged to them. It was forged from their pain and their resilience. As I stepped back, my eyes scanned the back of the auditorium. And I saw him. Kalen. He was standing alone by the exit, a solitary, diminished figure. For the first time, what I saw in his eyes wasn't anger or arrogance. It was a look of utter, soul-crushing regret. He was a ghost at a feast he could never join. Then he turned and slipped out the door, disappearing without a sound. He was no longer a part of my story. General Valerius returned to the podium. "And now," he announced, a slight smile touching his lips, "we have a few special guest speakers." A hush fell over the audience as Lieutenant Reese Valerius walked onto the stage. He moved slowly, deliberately, his leg braces a quiet, metallic testament to his journey. He wasn't using a wheelchair. He wasn't using a cane. He walked on his own. He stood at the podium, not as a broken soldier, but as a man reborn. He looked out at the crowd, then his eyes met mine. "The general said that Colonel Holmes brought me home," he began, his voice clear and strong. "But that's not quite right. Colonel Holmes didn't rescue me. She created a space where I could rescue myself. She didn't pull me out of the darkness. She just stood with me until my own eyes could adjust to it. And that is the greatest gift any leader can give." He paused, then turned to the audience. "And I'm not the only one. I'd like to invite a few others to share their stories." My heart stopped. This wasn't part of the program. One by one, soldiers I recognized from the rehab center, from my quiet talk in the common room, began to rise from their seats and make their way to the stage. It was an unrehearsed, unscripted, and utterly breathtaking moment. First came Lieutenant Kira Sterling. She walked up to the microphone and, with a confidence that radiated through the hall, held up her carbon fiber prosthetic hand. "Colonel Holmes taught me that strength isn't about what we've lost," she said, her voice unwavering. "It's about how we learn to grip what we have left." She didn't see a broken pilot. She saw a warrior who just needed to learn a new way to fly. Next came a grizzled Sergeant First Class from the 82nd Airborne, a man known for his legendary toughness. His voice was thick with emotion as he spoke. "For 3 years, I didn't sleep more than 2 hours a night. The nightmares, they were relentless. After one conversation with the colonel, just one, I slept through the night. She didn't give me pills. She didn't give me advice. She just listened. She gave me peace." Story after story unfolded. A young private who had relearned to trust. A captain who had found the courage to speak to his family about his PTSD. These raw, honest testimonials were more powerful than any official citation. They were transforming this formal military ceremony into a collective session of healing, a testament to the quiet, patient work that happens far from the battlefield. My legacy wasn't this silver medal on my chest. It was the small, bright flames of hope I could see burning in the eyes of these soldiers. They were my living, breathing medals of honor. When the last soldier had spoken, Reese stepped back to the podium. He looked directly at me, and for the very first time, a wide, brilliant, and genuine smile spread across his face. The darkness was gone. "Colonel Holmes," he said, his voice ringing with a newfound joy. "Tonight, would you do me the honor of a dance? Again?" A wave of thunderous applause and joyous laughter erupted through the auditorium. The formality of the ceremony dissolved in an instant, replaced by a pure, unadulterated celebration. But I knew this wasn't just an invitation for me. It was an invitation for everyone in that room. An invitation to celebrate not just survival, but life. An invitation to acknowledge the wounds, but to dance with the scars. It was the beginning of the most perfect ending. An ending not written by the Pentagon, not decreed by a committee, but created by the very people whose lives I'd been so privileged to touch. The formal ceremony concluded, but no one left. It was as if the final thunderous applause had broken a spell, releasing everyone from the stiff confines of military protocol. Someone, a young sergeant with a mischievous grin, wheeled a large portable speaker out onto the grassy courtyard behind the Womack Center. The warm yellow light from the building's windows spilled out onto the lawn, creating a makeshift ballroom under the stars. There was no polite jazz music this time. A moment later, the iconic rebellious opening riff of Bruce Springsteen's Born to Run ripped through the quiet evening air. A spontaneous cheer went up from the crowd. The party had begun. There were no formal invitations, no rigid etiquette. There was only the raw, driving energy of the music and a community of people learning how to live again. I saw General Valerius take off his decorated uniform jacket, toss it over a chair, and roll up his sleeves. He was laughing, truly laughing, sharing a story with a group of young soldiers who now saw him not as a general, but as a fellow traveler. This was a different kind of army, an army of survivors. And then they began to dance. It was the most beautifully imperfect dance I had ever witnessed. It was awkward and clumsy and breathtakingly real. Reese, his leg braces no longer a mark of weakness but a part of his strength, was dancing with Kira. She held one arm around his shoulder, her carbon fiber hand resting confidently on his back, and they were both laughing, a pure, uninhibited sound of joy. Soldiers in wheelchairs were spinning their chairs in time with the beat, their faces alight with a freedom no physical limitation could ever contain. A young woman with deep scars on her face was dancing with her eyes closed, a serene smile on her lips, lost in the music. Each movement, each awkward step, each joyful spin was a declaration of defiance. It was a testament to their resilience. They weren't hiding their wounds, they were dancing with them. This was not a dance of perfection or grace. It was a dance of acceptance, a celebration of the jagged, beautiful, and unbreakable human spirit. I stood on the edge of the light, just watching, and a sense of peace so profound and so complete washed over me that it felt like coming home for the first time. This was my family. This was my tribe. From the corner of my eye, I saw a flicker of movement in the shadows beyond the courtyard light. It was Kalen. He stood there for a long moment, a ghost at the edge of a world he could never enter, watching the joyful, messy celebration. He watched the people he had dismissed as broken, as liabilities, find a strength and a joy he would never know. Then, as quietly as he had appeared, he turned and melted back into the darkness. This time, his departure left no void, no anger, no sadness. I was free. I no longer needed the approval of my brother, my mother, or anyone else. My family was right here, in this circle of light, dancing with their own ghosts and winning. Kalen's disappearance was not a loss. It was merely the fading of a memory that was no longer necessary. Reese made his way over to me, his limp now a steady, rhythmic part of his gait. He was holding 2 plastic cups of fruit punch. "Tonight, Colonel," he said, his voice filled with a quiet, heartfelt gratitude, "we're all dancing for you." I looked at him, at the genuine warmth in his eyes, and then at the swirling, joyful chaos behind him. A true, real smile. The first one that reached all the way to my soul, spread across my face. I gently shook my head. "No, Lieutenant," I said, my voice soft but certain. I took one of the cups from his hand. Tonight, we dance for us. In that moment, I understood. True leadership isn't about pulling people behind you. It isn't about standing in front and issuing commands. It's about having the courage to join the dance. It's about creating a safe and sacred space where everyone feels free to be their own imperfect, wounded, and magnificent selves. I took a step forward, leaving the safety of the shadows behind me. I stepped into the warm circle of light. I stepped into the messy, beautiful, unscripted celebration. And I began to dance. The music swelled, the laughter grew louder, and the dance of the survivors continued, brave and human and free, long into the Carolina night. That night, as I watched my new family dance, I understood something essential. My story, with all its pain and its eventual peace, isn't unique. So many of us fight silent battles, feeling isolated in our struggles, searching for our own circle of light, our own chosen family. We find healing not in silence, but in sharing these journeys of resilience. This channel, Chosen Revenge, is a place dedicated to exactly that, a community built on the power of stories like ours. If my journey spoke to you, I invite you to subscribe and become part of this circle. Let's continue to find our strength and our voice together.